So I recently asked one of my biggest new Patreon supporters, you're at the unlocked level. Is there any videos you would like me to do? I mean, come on, you support me. Please tell me what you want to see. And he asked about how powerful APUs could get in the coming years. Now, at first I thought, I already made that one, the future will have less components or whatever I called it, APU video, but I never really talked directly about performance per year with APUs and how fast they've grown and how fast they will grow. And it got me thinking. And it is pretty interesting to look back through memory lane and also to estimate just how powerful an APU could be in, say, 3 years from now. I think people forget that right now we're already starting to get APUs with HBM on them integrated with i7s that rival the original Titan, a $1,000 250-watt graphics card that was considered absurd. And this was also, 2013, the era where people were still laughing at APUs for some reason. There's a lot of misconceptions then. So let's do it. Let's take a quick look down memory lane and see how long it's going to take for us to probably get to our current Titan. Funny thing is, APUs started to get big right when I was building my first decent gaming desktop. So I remember it in a major way. And this came out, I mean, technically, right, this Liano chip here came out in 2012, but it was already coming out in laptops the previous year. So when you see kindas up here, that means either it was the very tail end of the previous year or the very beginning of the next year. But there's always some chips of this variety being sold the year you see up here. But I may choose to highlight the desktop chip because I think that's, we like to use the desktop versions of every chip for a comparison point. So having said that, people were blown away. I remember this review on Newegg where someone said, I got an A8 3870K and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. This thing was defeating my GT 520 and my HTPC build in the living room. And while I know that's not impressive, this is the first time I have seen any integrated graphics beat any modern graphics card, even if it's a Weasley graphics card that costs $30. AMD, you've impressed me more than anyone in recent years. And that's really how Liano was taken. It actually wasn't that great of a chip to recommend, merely because it was still usually cheaper to get like a 6450 and let's say an Athlon times 3 or times 4 separately. But this would allow you to get a cheaper power supply. This would allow you to take up less space and use less energy. And so it was seen as overall better. And this is why also it was impressive, right? You had Intel with integrated graphics, all the way back to Nahelm, actually. Those 1000 HD graphics, they were horrible, though. Just god-awful. Like, your experience would be worse just web browsing. And even Sandy Bridge could suffer on some of the more chuggy, harder-to-run websites. But not the case with Liano. Everything you did, from Blu-ray watching to browsing the web, ran just as well as if you were using a beefy graphics card. And this blew people away. And for the first time ever, you could actually game decently in 720p with an integrated graphics card. And this is what one thing I really want to highlight here. So all of my columns show two equivalents: the desktop chips at the time, and the desktop, or I guess not even desktop, like graphics chips now. There's really no desktop chip being sold that's modern that can be compared to this in performance. It's like a third as strong as the Vega 3 graphics we have now. It was weak. It was very weak. But it did wipe out a segment, and it wiped out that $20 to $30, HD 5350, GT 510, like the biggest garbage graphics cards OEMs like to shove into PCs at the time. And that meant something. We had integrated graphics not just being literally a box you can check, but wiping out a niche segment of desktop chips. And they continued to. Next year, Trinity came out, right? And this used pile driver CPUs. Cores, and it still used the the Radeon 6000 series graphics architecture, unfortunately, but it was decently stronger. Now we're talking about where if you got the fastest DDR3 and overclocked it, you could come pretty close to an HD 6670. And that, again, pretty much blew people away. I mean, now we're talking real 720p gaming. And this thing was like, $120. And this is when you saw another segment of desktop graphics wiped out. We're not just talking about the $20 fire sale crap cards. Now we're talking cards below 40, 50 bucks are now worthless to get because it would be cheaper to just build this APU system. And then at the tail end of 2013, you had Kaveri launch, and it came to desktop early the next year in 2014. And this thing finally became a little more modern. Now we're on 28 nanometer, not 32. Now we're finally using the GCN architecture. Now we have PCI 3.0 on our god dang motherboards. This was a big upgrade, and now I can actually compare this fairly easily to modern chips, and it was about as strong as the HD 7730. Again, this is your like $60 to $75 chip, right? But this is when it's considered a real gaming chip, right? Your R5 240s, right now we would think of this as maybe a hair below a GT 1030, although you can find GT 1030s for this price once in a while, although they're usually the crappy, useless DDR4 versions. Nonetheless, this is when we started to see it just completely, without a doubt, wipe out entry-level graphics card. I mean, and what we use, now we call $100 graphics cards entry-level. We used to call entry-level cards below 80 bucks, and there were plenty of CPUs that had just worthless integrated graphics or no integrated graphics, and entry level was like 50 bucks. And this made all of that useless. If you're not getting a 7770, a 7750, or like a GTX 650, why are you bothering? That's what happened with this thing here. And it didn't sell that great, but it really proved APUs had come a long distance. And now I can actually compare it to something modern, like Vega 6 graphics and laptops. And all the way back then, they had it, and it was pretty damn impressive. And then there was kind of just a timeout period for AMD, so I have to include the Athlon 5350, Kabini. And I know a lot of people give me so much crap for bringing up Kabini, but I'm going to do it, and here's why. Let me show you something. This single channel DDR3 APU you could get for 30 to 50 bucks, and it was shoved into like, total 20 watt laptops, just like cheap $200 laptops. But if you consider the netbooks that were $200 back here, oh my God, they couldn't do almost anything. And now you could get a modern browsing experience. Yes, it was slower than things at the time, but if it was a decent laptop, especially with an SSD, you might not even notice. And let's look at performance per watt, because that's what impressed me the most with this series here in Kabini. It was still a bit weaker than Liano, right, in graphics performance. And you'll see that in the link I have in the description where Tom's Hardware reviews it. But this was still being put in 5 and 15 watt embedded motherboards and destroying the 10 watt atoms Intel had at the time. And for this little money, you had something that had quite easily 4 times the performance per watt of what they did back in the beginning here. It was a little weaker, but we're talking about at most 25 watts, and usually these were 5 to 15 watt chips. And it's almost the same performance as Liano. I mean, I tell you what, performance per watt between 2012, the 7970 and the 290X did not go up by like a factor of 10 people. It was going up by like a factor of 2 to 4. And this is where, you really notice, wow, APUs are increasing in performance per watt way faster than desktop chips. And it's because when you integrate all these components on a small space, they can share a lot of resources, and their performance per watt in the whole system is way less than having a separate card and CPU. And moving on, AMD didn't release that much here. This is where we start getting into Intel really blowing people away with Broadwell. And I remember them showing this 45 watt 45 watt APU they made, matching a GTX 650. And that's incredible. It was absolutely incredible to see some laptops coming out that were ultrabooks at the time and being able to game as well as $100 gaming graphics cards. well, using, a third of the energy as if you got those components separately. However, this came with a major, major downside, and that's cost. This here costs like $366, and the mobile versions were like 500 bucks. 10 times the price of this, and easily 4 times to 3. Like, it was stronger actually than Kaveri, which people couldn't believe Intel now had stronger integrated graphics than AMD. They're only doing it by spending 2 to 3 times as much, using a similar methodology as HBM with their integrated 128 megabyte EDRAM. But it was still impressive nonetheless, and it was at very least a proof of concept that, man, you guys better watch out. Even if they don't become that much cheaper, APUs are increasing in performance per watt rapidly. But then Intel hit a wall the next year. Their integrated Skylake graphics were generally 20% stronger, but look at this increase here, right? The execution units on Haswell, I think, were about 24, and then they doubled it, and performance more than doubled, or at least exactly doubled. But then they added 50% more execution units, and performance only went up like 20 to 30%, while power usage went up at least that much. And that's when you realize, oh wow, Intel just hit the wall. I guess Broadwell was about as good as they can get it. It's still almost about as good as a GTX 750, but the price was still crazy expensive. And I mean, their die size was way larger, and the performance was, this is when Intel realized, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to probably have to put some more effort into this. We can't scale this any further. And then we get to Ryzen, where AMD hit back hard. And we finally got an increase in SPs in the APUs again. We're now onto DDR4, so it's worth increasing the SPs a little bit. And that's what's holding back APUs this whole time. If you go all the way back, they really haven't been increasing SPs that much over time. And it's because they can only increase them as much as makes sense for the bandwidth that's supplying them. But again, this is where, again, let's all go back to what the point is. Now it's stronger than a GT 1030. So now you're starting to get APUs make every graphics card below $100 look a little silly. And this is now the sub $100 graphics card market is a ghost town. AMD's doing it, and even Intel is about that strong as well, even if they cost twice as much. This is what I just don't get. You continue to see every year people get surprised at how good APUs are, and I don't know why. They're getting about 20 to percent, well, they're getting really on average about 40 to 100% stronger around every 12 months. And that really hasn't slowed down that much. It's slowing down, but not nearly as much as the performance gains of desktop chips, and certainly not as slow as CPU performance has been increasing. And I just don't see it slowing down. Moving to the next year, we have Intel integrate AMD Vega GPUs into their expensive we'll call it premium crystal well lineups of APUs, and it's because they gave up after seeing the wall they hit here. They're going to take a timeout for 4 years where they hire Raja and work with making their new line of graphics cards. For now, they'll just work with AMD. This is a business. They're not afraid to work with AMD if it gives them a better product. Everyone likes making more money. And so here's where we see something truly mind-blowing. You didn't see this in mini chips. Usually they use the weaker Vega graphics, but the absolute strongest Vega plus Kaby Lake i7 APUs were actually about as strong as an RX 470 or a 1063 gigabyte. And I'm sorry, that's incredible. You have an integrated 1024-bit HBM2 interface, and then it can also pull, with high bandwidth cache from the DDR4. This is insane. We're talking about at most a 65-watt chip, and most of these are configured to 45 watts. These are like ultra-thin, bezel-less 14 and 15-inch laptops, only about this big, with 12-hour battery lives that are gaming as well as budget gaming builds, like real gaming builds, too. Not like ultra-budget builds, but builds with 1060s. This is absolutely incredible here to see. This is when we're almost, but it is expensive. They had to use HBM2. HBM2 is not cheap yet. So right now we're seeing this odd singularity start to pop up where they're just about ready to push the even RX 560 and below graphics out from making sense. And now it's 2019. This is where we get to the part of the video where I start estimating future performance. Here is Navi, and we know it's going to use Navi 20. And this is probably going to be pretty goddamn impressive. Right now, this is pretty much estimated to be as strong as a full 1060 or a 570, and I could see this selling for, and the leak says $200. So for $200, you get the equivalent of maybe an underclocked 9900K, right? And a RX 570. This is the beginning, people. Here, this is where all this is strong, going to be stronger than the PS4 Pro, or at least the same strength. And if you overclock it, I could see it coming pretty close to an Xbox One X. You know, this is where we're really going to start to see APUs make graphics cards below $150 silly. You know, the RX 3060 is going to be the cheapest graphics card you want to get, or you might as well just get an APU if you're building a new system. And this is when we're going to start seeing 1080p ultra graphics, the standard, even in cheaper laptops. I am excited for this. You know, and it's not crazy. You know, APUs are getting like 50% stronger roughly every year. And so let's move on to what I think could happen in 2020. This is really answering my Patreon supporters' question at this part of the video. So AMD seems to go back and forth. They have the cheap ones that use the integrated DDR4, and then the next year they kind of add an HBM premium chip for laptops. And I think that's what's going to happen next year. I think we will see Navi 40. I think we will see 8 gigabytes of HBM2, and this will be for premium laptops. And this will be expensive. If they bring this to desktop, it'll probably be, if I had to guess, a $300 chip. But this is going to be a very interesting situation. It's going to be very interesting to see it play out. We're going to see these like budget builds and desktop build videos on tech sites going, well, you got to decide. Do you want an RX 3070, or do you just want to pay $300 and slap that APU in there with 16 gigabytes of DDR4? Boom, done. You are done. Because this is when we're going to start getting APUs as strong as a GTX 1070. This is when 1440p gaming will be doable in like a $250 APU. And this is going to make life very easy for a lot of new system builders. Heck, they might even have motherboards where you don't even need to buy the CPU separately. I could easily see a $300 motherboard, ITX motherboard, where it says buy the RAM and buy an M-SATA card. Put it in, M-SATA SSD. Slot those in. Guess what? We've soldered on the APU that has HBM and graphics card and CPU. You might not even need, by the way, imagine this. There might be some of these ITX motherboards that are this big where they have 8 gigabytes of HBM2 integrated. You don't even need DDR4. The DDR4 option might be optional. You just buy the motherboard and an SSD and you're done. You know, this is what I talked about in one of my previous videos. I think we're going to see this next year. And then in 2021, again, it's keep getting faster. This is when you're going to start seeing the budget $120 APUs increase in performance. This is when we'll have DDR5 with 5,000 megahertz. And this is when it won't just be expensive APUs, you know, the ones over $200, but you'll have your $120, you know, 2400G replacements have 5,000 megahertz dual channel RAM, a 2048 SP. This is when you're going to have to start having RX 590 class graphics and $120 APUs, making, again, everything below $150 a stupid purchase for a desktop graphics card. And this is when you're going to start seeing those $500 laptops able to do 1440p medium setting gaming. Again, I am excited for this. This is all reasonable. This is the same rate of innovation we've had all these years. And what will happen in 2022? Well, I think this is when the APU singularity starts to happen. This is when Arcturus comes out. This is when we'll definitely have Zen 3 or even Zen 3 Plus. This is when I do believe we'll be on AM4 and AMD will just go for it. This is when we'll probably have 16 gigabytes of HBM2 and a 100 watt APU. And it'll be probably a hair below the Titan RTX. Now I know, everyone in the comment section is going to just call me an idiot again, just like they're calling me an idiot with the PS5 estimations, and go, Titan RTX and an APU, are you an idiot? And I'm like, no, I'm saying 3 years from now. What was going on 3 years ago? 2016? Maxwell Titan? Guys, I don't know what to tell you. Right now, you can get this APU here, that's as strong as a 470. I don't know. It's weaker than a Maxwell Titan, but it's definitely stronger than the. Yeah, let's think about 780 Ti. Yeah, it's definitely about as strong as a 780 Ti, so it's as strong as that Titan Black. It's not completely out of the realm of possibilities. And remember, and that's before they were, that's before they even have the HBM, faster HBM they can integrate. We're going to have that. It's not insane to think you could have 512 gigabyte per second HBM on there. And this won't be cheap. This will be at least $250, maybe even $350. But again, we're talking about something that will be 100, maybe 150 watts. In laptops, they'll make it less than 100 watts, as I'm pointing out here. I think this can happen in 3 years. I think in 3 years, we're going to start seeing, and keep in mind, I'm not saying it'll be as strong as the Titan of the time. No, I'm saying it'll be as strong as like this is when we'll start to have them approach RX 580, RTX 4060 performance. But I don't think this is out of the realm. And if it's not this year, expect it in 2023. And after that, 3 years after that, so 2025, 2026, I think we will have APUs making mid-range cards obsolete. Only dedicated cards you'll get anymore are the ones over $400, $500. They'll still make some budget ones for people who have old CPUs, just like they still do now at sub $100 graphics cards, but they will be more and more niche to get a graphics card below $300. You'll just get an APU. I think this is how soon this is going to happen. And the Good Old Gamer actually did a similar video about this a couple days ago as well. So check that one out. This is what I see happening. Go up. In conclusion, I've been in the game right since APUs started being good. And it's been fascinating to watch. Every year they're getting, at a minimum, 30% faster, which has not happened with desktop chips recently. We are still just getting over the performance of Pascal and the Fury. Honestly, even just like some of the Crossfire setups of Fury and Maxwell cards right now. It's not the same with APUs. They get much stronger per year, usually 50 to 100% stronger, even to this day, especially with HBM2 being thrown into the mix now. And I don't think that's going to stop. I think the APU that will come out this year is going to make everything below an RX 3060 or, in today's cards, an RX 580 obsolete, unless you have a really old system and you already have the CPU. That's just going to happen this year. And I believe the next year after that, 50% stronger, 50% stronger, 50% stronger. I believe within 3 to 4 years, we will have APUs as strong as the Titan RTX, probably for $300 or less. And that's going to start, already you see a lot of tech channels making their entry-level builds use the 2400G APU. And you're going to start seeing even mid-range builds. Within a year or two, you're going to see mid-range builds with APUs. And within 5 years, you're going to have even some high-end builds use APUs. That's just my prediction. And I hope that answers your question to my Patreon supporter, because he was mentioning how he was blown away by how when he got into the HD AMD 4000 series, how a lot of APUs are stronger than that beast of a card now. And the answer is yes. The beast right now, the Titan RTX, in 4 or 5 years, we will have APUs stronger than that, and that will start to be the standard. So I want to give a big shout out to Mikel Lira. Hope I said your last name right. Thank you for being an Unlock Patreon supporter. Unlock Patreon supporters can make direct suggestions to me, and I'll even ask a couple follow-up questions. And feel free to engage with me on Patreon if you're a supporter too. That's there for more in-depth conversations. Although I certainly talk to you guys way too long in the comments. I don't know how much longer that'll go on, but yeah. So again, please subscribe, share. Let me know. I'm sure there'll be some interesting APU conversations below. I'm actually more interested in what people thought during the Liano years, if anyone was there for them, because I thought those conversations were a lot of fun. Support me on Patreon if you got any extra spare change, and thank you.